Hey everybody, hope you're doing great today. This is Paul from This Way to the Garden, and in today's video I want to talk about the pros and cons of Bokashi composting versus traditional composting. So what's one of the major reasons why we compost? For those of us who garden, whether you have a flower garden, vegetable garden, you want to improve the soil fertility, you want to improve the soil quality, compost is a great way. You can find stuff in and around your house to process, basically turn it into a natural fertilizer. Spread that on your garden beds, spread that on your flower beds, and then watch the great results that happen afterwards. I've got a number of garden beds, as I've shown in other videos, and with those I mainly grow fruits and vegetables. And so in order to improve the overall fertility and quality of the soil in those beds, I use Bokashi composting. Now I also have a traditional compost bin there behind me. I'll show that here in a few minutes. But with the different types of compost, Bokashi compost and a traditional compost, there are different ways of going about getting that end product of compost, and there are different steps involved with each. So I primarily use Bokashi compost for my garden. I prefer it over the traditional compost method because I can keep it indoors. I can put more stuff into the Bokashi compost bin as compared to the outdoor traditional compost bin. That doesn't mean I don't use an outdoor compost bin as well too, because I can use a lot of yard waste in that compost bin, which I can't put in the Bokashi bin because I will quickly overflow it, and the Bokashi bin is more used for household food waste. So you can put household food waste in your traditional compost bin. Now with a traditional compost bin, one of the things you need to take care of is you need to make sure you put everything in order in layers. You need to mix your browns with your greens. You need to make sure the compost pile is adequately watered so it has enough moisture to complete its process. With the traditional Bokashi bin, you don't need to worry about watering and you don't need to worry about layering. An added feature of the Bokashi bin is you can add more household waste. So you can add meat cuttings that you aren't going to use for cooking. You're trimming off your meat. You can use bones left over from meat, any old cheeses and whatnot that you're not going to eat. They're gone bad for whatever reason. You can put those in there. So it is theoretically possible to put those types of items, bones, meats and stuff, in your traditional compost bin. The problem being it outdoors, you're going to attract a lot of vermin. You might have raccoons, rats, mice coming in and trying to get at that because they smell that. Whereas with the Bokashi bin, since it's inside, it's indoors, it's a sealed container, you don't get any smells, which is a big plus. So in addition to layering with your traditional compost, you also need to make sure it's moist and you need to turn it periodically. So traditional compost takes a little longer to process. It can be anywhere from 6 months to a couple of years. Again, it depends on what you have in that compost pile. Are you regularly maintaining it? Are you regularly turning it, adding water, making sure it has moisture? Then you can get some great compost out of it. Now with Bokashi, you don't need to do that. You don't need to water it. You don't need to layer it. You don't need to turn it. In fact, when I'm putting it in my Bokashi bin, I just simply throw it in there, add the Bokashi brand, seal up the container, and then to do that over a period of time until that container is full. I close it up, keep it sealed for 2 weeks, in which allows the fermentation process to occur. And then after that, then you can either add that Bokashi directly to your soil, depending on certain situations, or you can create a Bokashi soil factory to process that Bokashi and then put that soil on top of your garden. So one big advantage of the traditional compost method, like I mentioned earlier, is that a lot of my grass clippings, when I take this garden down after the frost kills everything, I'm going to chop everything up ground above. I can chop those up, cut those up, throw it into my compost bin and process it that way. So the Bokashi bins being small, they won't handle that much waste. So that's why I use two methods. I have the outdoor traditional compost for my household yard waste, and when my Bokashi bins are full, then I will take those items, rather than putting it in the Bokashi bin since they're full, I'll put them in the traditional compost bin, excluding things like meat, cheeses, bones, and whatnot. In terms of cost, with a traditional compost bin, you can go pretty cheap. You can buy some wiring, netting, enclose a certain area, start dropping stuff in there, mixing your greens and your browns, adding a little water periodically, and that's a great way to start. So minimal costs. With Bokashi, you do have an ongoing cost. You can buy a Bokashi bucket. There are some Bokashi buckets that have a drain underneath. Basically, it allows the waters to drip off, go down. It's called Bokashi tea. Some people will use that Bokashi tea to add to their garden. Initially, I was harvesting the Bokashi tea and using it in around my garden, but then it just became a lot of work to do that. In the two bins that I have that have a reservoir underneath, I sealed up those spigots so that the Bokashi's tea just stays in there. When I dump that Bokashi out, ultimately that tea that Bokashi tea gets dumped in the garden as well. Another bucket I did buy does not have a spigot, does not have a reservoir in there, and so it just basically gets treated as part of the entire Bokashi compost. So if you're buying a Bokashi bucket, so to speak, something that's airtight, those are a little more costly, starting $60, $70. You can usually get them in a kit off of Amazon and other retailers. And those kits will usually include the Bokashi bucket, directions, as well as a Bokashi starter brand. So that's one thing with the Bokashi you do need, is you need a starter brand. So here's a particular starter brand that I use, All Seasons Bokashi starter brand. So the Bokashi starter brand is basically spent bran, spent grain, that's been coated with bacteria that helps start the fermentation process in your Bokashi bin. So one of the downsides of Bokashi is that you cannot directly put it in soil in your garden where there's active plants growing. Whereas with traditional compost, you can. Once you get that fully processed compost and you want to add it to the top of your flower gardens, to the top of your vegetable gardens, you can do it. Put it on the soil and let nature take its course. Now with the Bokashi compost, the one problem is because it becomes acidic. The fermentation process creates a lot of acidity in there, so putting fresh Bokashi compost directly in and around your plants is going to cause problems. It's going to cause them to die because of the high acidity. So what some people will do is that they will build a Bokashi soil factory, which I have done. There's another video on my channel, feel free to take a look at it, on how to build a Bokashi soil factory. Basically with the Bokashi soil factory, you are putting soil and the Bokashi in a container, letting it sit for 2-3 weeks. The microbes in the soil will process that Bokashi. Basically, you won't even recognize what comes out, and then that you can directly put in your garden. So during the off season, when you've got nothing growing, early spring, late fall, when the frost has taken everything out. So in these cases, I do have a couple beds here that are a little low on soil. So what I will be doing in that case is I can add Bokashi directly onto that because nothing's growing in there. Cover it up with soil or dig trenches in the bed and then put the Bokashi in those trenches, cover those trenches up, and then it'll be ready for the next growing season. So basically, if you're going to be doing that, if you're putting Bokashi directly in the soil, it's best to do that and leave about 2 weeks before you plant anything in there. Unlike the traditional compost, where once the compost is ready, just grab it, put it on top of your beds, and let everything grow. Here's a typical Bokashi soil factory that I use. I add soil with the Bokashi, and then the microbes in the soil basically digest that Bokashi, turn it into soil, and that you can just directly put in any of your beds. Here's a typical traditional compost bin. As you can see, it hasn't been touched by me in a little bit, so it's not something that I actively work on. But I do put my household waste. I put these biodegradable packing peanuts in there. You can see some eggshells and some greens. As my garden basically gets taken down by frost, I'll trim the tops of these and then just put that directly into the compost bin. This is a typical Bokashi bin. I purchased this off of Amazon. As you can see here, there's the bottom reservoir. I mentioned there's a spigot on the side, which you can see right here. And the spigot I've just sealed up because I don't use it. My other bucket, which does not have a drain, it doesn't have a bottom layer, doesn't have a bottom tray like this. That tray just allows the Bokashi tea to settle down. Here's a typical bag that we've been saving inside. This consists of eggshells, tea leaves, stems from herb plants, some lettuce discards. Occasionally we will put meat discards in there, and then it's just a matter of dumping it into the bucket. So just dump it into the bucket. Grabbing a scoop of the bran over here and just sprinkling it on. So in this case, I could level it out, but that doesn't really matter. It's going to fill up as I fill it over time. It'll probably go through 6-7 of those bags. So that's all I have for this video. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Do you use Bokashi composting? Do you use traditional composting? Or is there some other form of composting? Those aren't the only 2 forms of composting that I mentioned. But feel free to share in the comments below what you think. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.